Hello everyone, and welcome to another YouTube video on creating a metadata-driven processing framework for Azure Data Factory. In this video, I want to introduce you to some new failure handling behavior that is soon to be released in version 1.8 of the framework. Now, through our excellent data platform community, through the GitHub repo and through my blog, I've had a lot of great feedback from people out there using the framework on how we could better handle the restarts, the pipeline relationships, and what that could look like. So a lot of you guys have really helped me bake in the design and the requirements here of what we need. So what I want to introduce is what I've developed as a result of your feedback. And really this now takes the form of a new property that we've got in the properties table of the metadata database. And this property is called failure handling. So what I want to do is show you the three values for that new property, the definitions, what they mean, and then demonstrate how that actually affects our pipeline and worker executions. So let's get into it and let's dive straight into Management Studio. So what I've got for you here is those definitions for each of these new failure handling property values. Now the first one hopefully is fairly obvious, and we're going to have a value of none. So if you don't want any downstream failure handling, that's fine. You may have a scenario that requires that, and in that situation the worker pipeline will simply get a status of failed in the current execution table, and the framework will then just carry on regardless. So what I've done for you to try and keep this video as short as possible is I've ran an execution run with that status, with that failure handling of none, and this is the result in my current execution table. And what you can see is my intentional error pipeline has failed, and we've got that record there, but then everything in the same execution stage has ran, and also everything in the subsequent execution stages has been allowed to carry on as well. So that's the first version of our failure handling, and that first property value of none. So that's one behavior that you may want or you can now use. So the next property value, or the next failure handling scenario that I want to demonstrate for you, is what I've called simple. So what we can do is let's just clear the decks so we can start again. And then what I'm going to do is in my data factory, let's close that run where we did the failure handling of none, and let's get my parent pipeline. And what I'm going to do is you may notice that I'm currently connected to the GitHub repository. I'm using the feature branch of 1.8, and I'm going to run this in debug mode. Debug mode, of course, isn't very demo friendly because you'll probably get this warning that the for each activities, they won't execute in batch mode, they will execute sequentially when you're debugging, just a limitation of the debug environment. But what we can do is we'll kick this off and we'll look at that simple failure handling behavior, mainly through Management Studio. So in my execution table, we've got our new metadata for it, and we've got the stage 1 workers preparing. Now, as I say, this is going to happen sequentially, so it is going to be quite slow. So what I'll hopefully try and do is for you watching, I'll pause the video at certain intervals just to try and cut out bits of where things are just happening in the background. The main thing to note, though, is that with the simple failure handling behavior, this really is what we've already been used to in the framework. Since version 1.2, when I introduced the restart capability, this is what we've already had. So simple is the restart behavior that we had from version 1.2. And what that means for us is that the worker pipeline will get a status of failed in the current execution table as before, but then all downstream execution stages are going to be marked as blocked. And once that happens, processing is going to stop after that execution stage where the failure has occurred. So you may have already witnessed this from what was introduced in version 1.3, but we'll just go through it for the sake of this video. And what I'll do is I'll just pause here while we wait for those other workers to complete. So now my intentional error worker pipeline is running under the simple failure handling behavior. This is just hitting a stored procedure in the database called fail procedure. It's also in the repository, but it's just got a raise error exception that's thrown in there just so we can simulate an actual worker that might fail in another environment. So let's just wait for that exception to be thrown. The infant, of course, will now be sort of just checking and waiting for that exception to occur and the outcome of that worker. There we go. So the intentional worker pipeline has now failed, and as we've said, the downstream execution stages will now all be marked as blocked because of that failure in stage 1 in this case. Stage 1 will complete, so you'll notice that we've still got wait 3 set as preparing. Ordinarily, when we trigger it, that probably would have already happened in parallel, but because we're in debug mode, the sequential behavior means that wait 3 hasn't actually ran yet, so it's now moved on to that, and it's now, as you can see, running wait 3. So we'll just allow that to succeed. So stage 1, everything has ran. We've got 3 successes, that 1 failure, and then because of that 1 failure, everything in the downstream stages has now been blocked. What that also means in our data factory, once this bubbles back up, which it already has, got that error where the procedure is checking for any blockers. So all of those 3 downstream stages have been blocked. And finally, when we bubble back up to the parent, we get a failure at the parent level as well. So that's, I say, the restart behavior that we already had in since version 1.2, but now been recategorized under this simple failure handling behavior. Okay, good. So let's move on then to the new dependency chain behavior that I really want to show you. Oops. So let's update my properties table again. And let's clear down the decks because we obviously don't really care about that. And let's go back to my data factory. I tend to just close the pipeline and just refresh just to clear the outputs of the data factory pipelines that we've just ran. So let's go again now with that new dependency chain behavior. So we'll get our execution run in a moment, but let's talk about the definition of what this means, because this is the important new feature that we're adding. The worker pipeline will get the failure status as with the previous 2 property values, but then what happens is only the downstream pipelines are going to be marked as blocked. So in the simple scenario, downstream execution stages are marked as blocked. Here, only the downstream pipelines are marked as blocked. And this uses the new pipeline dependencies table that's going to be added in version 1.8, which we'll look at in a moment. And what it means is that the framework will hit that table, it will look at where the downstream dependents are, mark them as blocked, and then through the execution of the subsequent stages, our check for blockers procedure will look ahead, and using that new dependency chain, it will mark those pipelines as blocked. But where pipelines aren't blocked, the framework will still be allowed to carry on. So if you like, with our dependency chain, we've got now a combination or hybrid behavior of our non and our simple, but using this new dependency chain metadata. So let's have a look at it. We're still running, so we might pause again in a minute for the sake of the video. But with our pipeline dependencies table, what we have is a pipeline ID, and then we have a dependent pipeline ID. So both of these are foreign keys to our pipelines table. But let's just put this side by side on our execution table. So what this means is, or what's going to happen, we've got our pipeline ID 3, which is our intentional error. And what we're saying is that pipelines 6 and 7 are dependent on pipeline 3. So when pipeline 3 fails, 6 and 7 are going to become blocked. And those are in stage 2, as you can see. What we're also saying is that then pipeline 7 also has a dependent of pipeline 10. So in our execution stage 3, we're also going to get pipeline 10 being blocked because of that dependency chain. And then finally, because I've got 4 execution stages in my dev environment, we're now going to have pipeline 10 blocked, pipeline 11 blocked by 10 as well. So, we've got this dependency chain that exists from 3 to 6 and 7, then to 10, and then finally to 11. So let's just have a refresh. We're in debug mode still, so we're still getting sequential executions of the workers. So our intentional error good is now running. Maybe I won't pause, maybe we'll just wait for this one. As you may have heard me say before, hitting refresh makes it run faster. Of course not, don't be silly. But we'll keep doing it anyway. It makes you feel good, right? So intentional error worker running. Never waited so long for something to fail. Status checked. There we go. So we have that failure that's occurred, and that failure having occurred in stage 1, the failure procedure has updated the subsequent execution stage. So it will only look one stage ahead at the moment. And as per our metadata that we've got over on the right, 6 and 7 have now been blocked. But of course, only 6 and 7 have been blocked, which means our other processes can continue. So let's just refresh again. So we're finishing stage 1, really again, because we're in debug mode. Let's allow stage 1 to finish. Good. Stage 1 is finished, so we're going to start stage 2 momentarily. So you'll see that we've still got 2 worker pipelines in stage 2 that could be executed based on what we know about our dependents. So what we'll see shortly is when stage 2 kicks off, we're going to get those pipelines that can be ran as preparing. But what we'll also do is So what you see now is what's happened is the check for blockers procedure, it's started looking at stage 2. It says, okay, I've got pipelines that are blocked in stage 2 because of the upstream failure. It will then look ahead to stage 3, and using our dependency information, it'll say, okay, well, pipeline 6 and 7 are blocked. It knows that pipeline 10 is dependent on 7, so it's looked ahead to execution stage 3 and now marks pipeline 10 as blocked as well. But of course, it's at the same time still allowing stage 2 to be executed. So 4 has success. We're preparing. I might just pause here just while we wait for that to happen. So now our stage 2 has completed successfully for those workers that weren't blocked. And what we're going to do is we're going to move on in a moment to stage 3, and we'll see that same behavior where stage 3 starts, it checks for blockers, it will look ahead to see if there is any more downstream dependents that also need to be blocked as a result. So yeah, there we go, that's now happened. So stage 3 will have started. We've looked ahead. We know that 11 is dependent on 10. So we've looked ahead and we've now got that block status as well on pipeline 11. Of course, though, we can still run pipeline ID 9 within stage 3. So there you go, that one's kicked off. So what it will mean is that stage 3 will now run and complete. Stage 4, of course, has no pipelines that can now be executed because they're effectively all blocked, or there's that one blocked pipeline. So stage 4 actually now just won't even run at all. So actually stage 3 will now just complete our processing, running, nearly there. Success. So nothing more really in the execution table to see because of course we've got that failure in stage 1, which has blocked our stage 2 pipelines, subsequently blocked our stage 3, and finally blocked our stage 4. But of course everything that wasn't blocked has now completed successfully. So let's just turn our attention to Data Factory and see what we've got in the parent. So things are still just bubbling up from the child pipeline. Now, because we have allowed the framework to continue using that dependency chain, we then, after all of our child pipelines have completed, we can't throw the same exception that we had from our simple behavior. So we now just need to do something slightly different with what was the archive of the logs. Now, what that procedure is doing is also checking if we have successful outcomes for everything, which of course we don't. We have a completed execution run, but there have been failures that have occurred. So what we now get from this procedure is that error message. So the framework execution is complete, but not all worker pipelines succeeded. So we have that sort of inconsistent state, if you like. But that's fine because, of course, we can restart. This message then gives you the hint to go and fix your worker pipeline or do whatever's necessary to overcome that failure, which, of course, I can do in my dev environment because the error was very intentional, and that error is driven by my pipeline parameters. So what I can do is I can say, actually, this time, let's not raise those errors. Let's say false. So I've effectively fixed the worker pipeline, and I'm just going to kick off the debugging again. And this is then triggering that restart behavior that we're then used to. So if we come back to our execution table, we'll just see what the framework does. So you'll see it's cleared out the failure status where it occurred, and then where we've got those downstream pipelines that of course didn't complete before they can now be ran. So the same restart behavior that we used to, but now obviously a lot more targeted to the exact pipelines and those exact dependencies. Good. Okay, that concludes everything that I really wanted to show you for this video. So thank you everybody for watching, and hopefully you can join me again soon. Please subscribe to my channel and look out for version 1.8 of the framework being released very soon. Bye for now.